Hi, my name is Glyn. I'm a registered mental health nurse and a cognitive behavioural therapist. With men, the male burden of performance, invariably depression is often to do with how they view themselves and how they're performing in their role as a male. So you'll get things like, I'm useless, I'm a loser. Now conversely, I know this is going to be a bit confusing, women when they get depressed, they'll be going things like, I'm fat and I'm ugly, right? And that's very much about the kind of how people are viewing them, how they're perceiving people viewing them. But with the male, it's how he's perceiving himself. One of the reasons for that, again, nipping a little bit into evo psych, is that men were rewarded on what they did. So the more buffalo you could hunt, the more status you got. Women, the more youthful and beautiful you were, the more fertile you were, the more value you were to the tribe. So, I mean, those are the two sides of the coin in kind of depression, but generally the burden of performance does affect that sense of self and male depression. Men get their sense of self from what they do, all right? And these things can be generally three things that these come down to. These come down to the ability to provide, can you bring back the bacon? The ability to protect, can you beat off the bad guy? Can you protect your women? Can you protect your children? And your ability to pass on your genes. Those are the three areas that men tend to get their self-esteem from. If a guy is kind of assessing himself as managing those areas fine, he will feel good about himself, pretty much. The other thing that I think, to bring in the difference, though, again, as I understand it, between the male and the female point of view, is that a guy generally is quite happy to talk about his feelings, but there has to be a purpose and performance behind that. All right, he's not going to do it just to talk about his feelings. I think that performance thing there is always there, it's always going to be there. It's not about validating the feelings very much as, right, how can I work through this? How can I move on? But I think the other thing as well is very important, that energy to compete, that energy to perform is also validated, because I think that's one of the areas that has been going on, is being this kind of message where actually men need to be more like women, and I think that's a very damaging message. There's a couple of things that I think go on here. Is, along with the burden of performance comes the disposability of men. All right, men are actually disposable to society. All right. So, you know, you can send 40,000 men over the top of the Somme, and as long as there's some good breeding stock left, the human race will go on. Now, along with that, you have risk-taking behaviour, and also what I call the fuck it gene, which is there'll come a point of stress and a guy will just go, right, fuck it. These are driven by different energies. Anger is one, despair and hopelessness is the other, particularly despair and hopelessness when looking at the burden of performance. You know, and we can see this because the suicide rate is much higher in men of low socioeconomic status. And the other thing as well is that men generally don't want to be seen to fail, so they will do the job properly. Hence, they will do something often very violent. They will go for the quick, instant kill. So, because suicide will often fall into two main groups. Usually, suicide is either escape or communication. And you can always put any suicide behaviour into one of those two groups, or sometimes both. I think often what happens is that on the female side, it will verge more towards the communication. You have made me so bad that I have done this. And hence, this is why the overdose will come in, because there is usually time for that person to be found, for some solution to be given. Men are designed to hunt and kill and be killed. So when you get that kind of energy mixed in with a low socio-economic thing, an inability to meet the burden of performance, and a point where you get the fuck it come in, and the violent act, that is why you get that disproportionate statistic. Male and female both have burdens of performance, but they are different. And I think if we ignore those, then that's an error. That's one thing that I'd love to get in. I think just getting more men into psychological services, because particularly when we're actually, the split between men and women accessing psychological services is 60-40. Why aren't the psychological services attracting men? What is it about that? Why is that happening? So I think that would be a good area for future change.